What's up, everybody? This is Grant, that Cause Artist. Welcome to episode 87 of the Disruptors for Good podcast. Today, we're going to speak with Sebastiaan van der Lans, founder of WordProof, on using blockchain technology to create a more transparent and trusted internet for creators, publishers, and entrepreneurs. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll speak soon. Thanks. Have a great one. So usually how I like to start these conversations is really about an individual's journey. And when I speak to people on this show, usually they're individuals who are working on something, pretty big that'll take up, a lot of their time, right? A lot of their dedication in their life, and to build something big like that, I think it takes a lot of experience and it takes a lot of dedication. So I guess talk a little bit about your background and just your journey to get to even the point where you wanted to start WordProof.
The journey so far, WordProof is a really fresh company. We started it 1.5 years ago. But before that, I worked with WordPress for over 14 years. I was the founder of one of the first WordPress agencies in the Netherlands. And what I learned there really early in my life was how open source software plus a community can become a market leader. WordPress today, it powers over 39% of all the websites on the internet, which is, to me, mind-blowing, as it's not a company, it's a community. And how do you compete with a community with hundreds of thousands of people developing on it, working on it? So that's my business background. Started that agency with my co-founder in 2006, worked for all kinds of television shows, publishers, e-commerce, charity. Then what happened, there was something special. We always had the wish, it was a healthy agency, is a healthy agency.
Sure.
But we always had the wish to contribute not only small things to open source, but a significant thing. Mm-hmm. Then something special happened in Europe, and it was GDPR.
Hate it or love it, huh?
I hate it or love it. Always when I speak at a conference, my first question is, who loves GDPR? Nobody does. Of course, nobody does, because the execution was not so, to say it generously, it was not so good. But the intention behind GDPR was wonderful. Hey, it's for the citizens of, in first instance, Europe. It's hard to protect their privacy. They don't take accountability for it as they don't know how to do it. They're not educated. Let's make businesses and organizations a bit more responsible for that. So the intention was to give the inhabitants of Europe a bit more rights with their own data. Then we made a plugin, GDPR, a fix for WordPress for free. And that was a few months before the deadline. That was May 2018. And we made the plugin. Because why did everybody hate it? It needed to comply, which was costly in a way, but it wasn't productive. You had to invest to be compliant without it being productive. We thought, okay, we make a plugin for it for free. This is the perfect ingredients for something open source. So we made the GDPR compliance plugin, released it a few months before the deadline. After a few weeks, tens of thousands of downloads. A few weeks later, 100,000 downloads. Today it has 1.3 million downloads. Wow. And it's running on over 100K WordPress sites, which is fun, as that's where we learned the power of open source. We invested around 80,000 euros, 100K in dollars in making it. The direct revenue, nothing at all. But by that time, it was really hard to find good developers. Because of the contributions to open source, we were so much cooler as a company to work for. So it solved while doing good, it solved other hard things in our organization. And that was 2018. We still run that plugin. We still support it. And then I thought, okay, hey, in 2013, we did some prototyping with Bitcoin and Ethereum, all blockchain stuff. Mm-hmm. And I thought, hey, how can we do something good and great for the world with the blockchain? Or how can we bring the big potential that blockchain has while leveraging the knowledge we have from the open source, the WordPress ecosystem? So that's where WordProof started. There was a big competition, as you told in the introduction. It was the Europe's Challenge Blockchains for Social Good. We participated as one of the parties, and we got the recognition of winning that. And that's where we are today. A company, through timestamps, we try to restore the truthfulness and the trustworthiness on the internet as it fixes trust in society.
And I think it's going to be a lot like GDPR. I think blockchain has some of the same issues where it's kind of hard to explain, right? And it kind of glosses over people. And with GDPR, like it's with blockchain, it's the idea is really good, right? Like it comes from a genuine place, but sometimes it can be a bit hard to understand, right? And then equally as hard to sort of implement, right? Whether as a company, as a creator, all these different things come into place, and it's just overwhelming, right? And so to make complex, I think, issues or policies easy to read, right, or much more digestible. I think having tools like that at scale is really powerful and interesting, right? So did you learn a lot from the GDPR, setup and process, and bringing that to sort of WordProof and say, hey, we want to make something complex, really easy to use and really to implement across a wide sector of sites across the internet?
Yeah, we learned a lot, but that was really operational. And hey, how do you maintain a big plugin? The thing we had there, which really helped more in marketing the product, was that there was a hard deadline where people had to be compliant.
Right.
What we do now is way more mission driven, because I never talk about blockchain in a way. Blockchain is a solution. It's a solution to a problem space. And the problem space is that we live on an internet that was designed to connect computers to computers instead of people to people. What you see is there's a deep-rooted issue, trust. We have all forms of misinformation, fraud, manipulation on the internet. What we see is, it's quite obvious that it happened, as trust simply wasn't part of the internet's design. And here in society and outside, when we are not on the computer, there are all sorts of tools to make sure that obnoxious human behavior can't thrive. But on the internet, we don't have that systems. And what we need to do, in fact, is making transparency and accountability. So how did information change over time? And who was the sender of that information? If we can make that preconditioning for all communication on the internet, then we fix the internet. And fixing the internet results in a better society, as those two are so woven in to each other.
Let's get into the nerdy stuff a little bit of how it, I guess, one, what does blockchain do, right, in this context of WordProof, and how does it, I think obviously trust in the internet is a big issue, right? I mean, especially around news, information, and we'll get into e-commerce a little later, because I think that's kind of another avenue that's really, really interesting. And I think it's kind of this next step where content and news, the written word, has kind of been the first thing to attack from maybe a manipulative space. And I think e-commerce is probably next at mass scale. Sure. So let's go into the nitty gritty of what WordProof does. One, let's just say what blockchain is, first of all, from an elementary level, and then we'll go into how WordProof is using blockchain to enhance sites.
For sure. So blockchain, most people think directly of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a way to transfer value from one person to the other without a government, without a bank in between. How does it work? In fact, we're with the three of us. It's you, it's me, and the listener. Yep. How it works is you have 3 Bitcoin and you want to pay me 1 Bitcoin. You say, hey, I want to do that transaction. And all participants in that network, the people who own the same currency, say, okay, hey, Grant has 3 Bitcoin. So it's allowed to, we allow him to transfer 1 to Sebastian. Do we all agree? Okay, yes, then there's a transaction. Then in our public, and everyone says, okay, Grant has 1 more, less, and Sebastian has 1 more. Blockchain is nothing more and nothing less than this mechanism where all of us agree, or at least the majority of us agree, that it's okay to do that transaction as you have that fund. And from that moment, we all...
It's sort of a validation, right? It's sort of a badge of... There's no way to...
It's a public database.
It's no way to... The biggest part about it is no way to manipulate that agreement, so to speak, right? Once it's there, once it's agreed upon, and once it's transacted, there is no returning it, right? Like there is no, that's it. This is finalized, right? This is what it is what it is, which is, it's sort of interesting because it's incredible to build trust on the top of that, right? Like, because it is essentially open source software, right? Like if you look at it, it's
It
sort of
is.
sort of a like we were explaining before, what WordPress is. It's kind of the same idea where it's a community that it's an open source element that validates, certain things, right? And I think cryptocurrency was the first one, right, at mass scale that people were introduced to blockchain through cryptocurrency, which I would argue
That's
was
the
which stinks because it was a bad way to introduce blockchain to the world. Probably is through.
and that here's the fun part, because Bitcoin was great marketing for blockchain technology, as there's the Bitcoin white paper, that's 2008, 2009, Bitcoin launched. But in the Bitcoin white paper, that's a reference to another white paper from 1991, which is about timestamping documents and therefore improving or proving the integrity of information. Blockchain was invented in 1991 for timestamping. Bitcoin made it popular because, hey, there's some money to earn, so speculators get in. Almost everyone, 99% of the people in Bitcoin, started not for the social good thing, but for the speculation.
Yep.
Then they learn, wow, there's a whole world around it, and you get in the rabbit hole. But it starts with the financial use case, which is good, as it pulls in so many people and talent from out the world, which then learn about the social good part. But Bitcoin or blockchain was invented for timestamping, and what we do at WordProof is executing the use case of timestamping in a as AAA as possible.
Let's talk about, I think the use cases are really important because one, it helps. That's how I learn, is through use cases, right? It allows, but it really just, that's how my brain works. And I hope others kind of learn in the same way. So just how the use case of a blockchain, of Bitcoin and sort of financial currencies on blockchain. Let's look at other use cases that blockchain can do, right? One being content, right? Something, I dedicate, sort of my life to it at this moment. And I think a lot of people engage with content, whether it's news, whether it's education. There's so many different ways to engage with content. But I think top of mind for a lot of people is information, right? News and information, I think is the big sort of thing that is the most untrusted thing in the world right now, right? So how do we take the use case for content, put it on the blockchain, and have that be, a better source of make that better, right? Make that one thing have a little bit more, verification behind it and trust, which, equals good at a scale, right? Once you have that trust, it's a big deal.
Sure, we can do a few use cases in content, as it's still so broad.
Yeah.
So let's start with the news use case, but from there we can dive into copyright, which is an interesting one for creatives as well. It touches search engine optimization. How do you make sure that your content ranks high? And after that, we can do e-commerce. E-commerce is content as well. You base your buying on the terms and conditions on the product information. But let's start with news. Simplest way to explain transparency is say, on a news outlet, you see last edited 3 hours ago. You could say, wow, thank you for being so transparent. But you could also be a bit suspicious. What was there 3 hours ago that I'm not allowed to see anymore? What you can do with timestamping and making the revisions of content visible that's a form of transparency. So what a timestamp is at its core, it's from a piece of content, the headline and the content of it, you make a unique fingerprint. That fingerprint, you make it in an open source way so anyone can see how you came to that fingerprint. That fingerprint we put in a blockchain transaction. From that moment, you can always prove that the specific content existed at that specific moment in time. That's what the technology does.
When something is published, though, right? Let's say like WordPress, you hit publish, then that creates the timestamp. And then from that moment on, if you edit anything within that, it continually sort of stamps it with this sort of timestamp of when things were changed. And then and that goes for sort of any, I mean, WordPress is the simple one we could talk about. But like a lot of platforms like, Bloomberg and, Financial Times or Fox News or MSNBC, they're probably not using WordPress, right? They're probably using some custom platform or some enterprise platform that they use. And so could they theoretically use this too, right? It doesn't matter
Yes.
what platform you use. The software can be adaptable to any type of platform.
So there's an API, there's a Shopify integration at the end of this year. There's a WordPress integration soon. There's a Drupal integration. So for every platform. But the thing is, in the front end, it's about the visitor can click on the 3 hours ago, last edited 3 hours ago, and there ideally can scroll through all revisions, which are timestamped. So what a timestamp does is bringing transparency. Ideally, there's sort of a time machine. We offer that, but most publishers say, "Ooh, that's kind of scary to be this radical transparent." And the second element is connecting an identity to a timestamp. So the blockchain address you timestamp with, you as a writer, you as a publisher, you as a news outlet can say, "Hey, it's really me who's publishing this information."
I guess the big thing with sort of news, right? And let's take just WordProof, for example, right? If I install it on my site, let's say I get like this little badge, right? Like a shield of some sort of, where that shield is trusted a lot, like organic labels or fair trade or like a B Corp label. It validates something, right? It gives, I think, people some type of trust in something, right? That they equate with. I guess the issue is that, you know, people who intentionally produce this fake news, so to speak, right, or unintentionally misinform people through the content produced, right, they're not going to want to do this, right? Like that's not something they're going to want to, because they're intentionally trying to manipulate things. So then it becomes something where if it's trusted that you have this sort of WordProof badge thing, right? Because then if people start looking for that, then they can distinguish sort of things and say, hey, this is a way to sort of weed out publishers or information that is not sort of taking the time out to get themselves verified, so to speak, right, on the blockchain in a way.
So let's look at the role of a timestamp. A timestamp is a boring thing. It's a technology from 1991. What do we do? Why now the internet is a mess, and why now blockchain technology finally starts to become scalable? The timestamp, a person can check the timestamp and the revisions of media, which brings transparency to those who love transparency. But ideally, there's a government who requires it. There's a search engine who rewards the transparency and accountability you show. That's where the magic starts. So what you can do is connecting an identity to your timestamp, to your blockchain address. What you can do is say, hey, I connect no identity to the information. I can connect my full-fledged government ID to my timestamp, or steps in between. So government is level 6, no identity is level 0, but LinkedIn address that or account that exists for over 5 years can be level 5 or level 4, and a Twitter where you still can be kind of anonymous is level 2. In that way, you can say you can choose the level of accountability you connect to your content. And what you can then do is educating the search engines and social media. The more accountability someone takes and connects to the content, the farther it can spread, or the higher the rank. So content without identity, you can post it, of course, on the internet, otherwise it would be censorship, but it can't travel really far. Content with your Twitter account can not only friends, but friends of friends. Content with your LinkedIn account can spread a bit further. And with your government account or some one tier below, it can go viral. What you do there is anonymous content can't go viral. So there is freedom of speech, but there isn't freedom of reach for all. Because that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, but
that's one of the biggest.
It is the big, yeah, but I think you'd have to get the companies to allow, you know, somebody with it. Let's say, you know, I'm using, you know, WordProof or somebody else is, or, you know, a publisher or whatever it may be. Google has to agree that timestamp has value to it, right? They have to put value to it to say you're going to go up higher in the rankings because you have. You're a trusted, verified sort of publisher, right? So we still have to get Facebook to say go along with this, right? So that would be the problem I see, is that we still would need these massive companies whose bottom line are based around algorithmic advertising, right?
Absolutely.
Which is sort of this murky space, right? Where, their bottom line would probably get hit if they implemented this trust stuff. Although I think in the long run, it would be very valuable for their company. Short term, these public companies are going to take hit revenue wise, right? Because they have to take this monumental shift into becoming a trusted platform, which takes time to do. But over time, I think it'll alleviate a lot of the other problems that they're facing, and it'll cut down on their legal fees probably, so they'd save money.
But shall we dive in a bit on the search engine?
Yes.
That's a really interesting one. The question is, one of the investors in WordProof as a company and the trusted web movement is Joost de Valk. So everyone who uses WordPress uses Yoast SEO, Yoast search engine optimization. Joost de Valk, founder, and his wife Marika are investors in this movement because they deeply care about improving the web in an open source way. Joost isn't a fan of blockchain. When I reached out to him 2 years ago and said, "Hey, Joost, I want to pitch you something," he said, "Okay, but I don't like blockchain at all. I think it's, don't like it." I explained to him, "Hey, this is what it does in an open source way. We can prove that information isn't altered." And I showed him a prototype, which was really buggy. And he said, "Holy shit, this fixes so many problems in search engines that they can't fix today." And that's where the magic started. We weren't talking about investing. That was totally not the idea, but they say, "Hey, I want to do everything I have in my power to make sure that we can roll this out to the internet," as it's truly a base layer of trust. In search engines, the question is always, and that's what Joost always has said, is there's only one sustainable strategy to rank high in search engines, and that's simply being the highest quality result for the query that's being asked. And he said, I sound like a broken record, but that has been true for over 10 years. And the question was in 2014, hey, if I make a mobile website, will I rank higher? The answer was yes, of course, because it's a higher quality search result for the one who searches. And there's even a separate index for it. Secondly, then a few years ago, the question was HTTPS, if I have kind of the lock in my browser, does that make me rank higher in the search engine? Absolutely, it did, as it's a more secure and therefore a higher quality search result. So the question, logical next question will be, hey, if I can prove that I didn't tamper with my data and that I take accountability, is that a higher quality search engine result? Probably the answer is yes. Secondly, hey, an advertiser, what does an advertiser want? The advertiser wants to have control on next to which content their brand will be advertised. Otherwise, their brand is at risk, which they take for granted now. Maybe the advertiser is willing to pay a premium for the guarantee to be advertised next to quality content. So in a way, it is a threat for their treating their business model at some places, but it enhances their business model on other places.
Yep. I think the question I have is that with sort of the mobile AMP style, sort of, making sure your site is sort of AMP approved, like or AMP structured. That was something Google came out with, though, right? Saying, hey, do this and we will reward you for, we will crawl your site, make sure it has, AMP structure involved, and we will reward that with higher search rankings because you could read it better, the person can get to their information faster. I get that. But Google is not coming out and saying, hey, we want to have a timestamp or a blockchain on your site yet, right? Is that a possibility coming? Because the algorithm still has to crawl the site and say, hey, they are WordProof verified, so to speak, quote unquote, right? We're going to give that just as much weight as having the AMP structure, right, on your website, right? Or having an SSL certificate. That's the game changer when we get to that point. And how far are we off maybe getting to that point where these platforms that are indexing and crawling everything reward the blockchain verification the same as they would like a mobile friendly site or SSL secured?
Yeah, so it sounds a far cry, but with Yoast on board, it isn't actually. It's
Right.
what I learned. What I learned in the last 15 years of being in the open source business is it shouldn't be a WordProof timestamp. It's really the whole thing. There's no
Right.
trust in WordProof involved to make this happen. So
Yeah.
there's a language that search engines and social media use to see that Grant is not only a word but your first name. That
Hmm.
WordProof is not only a word, but it's the company where Sebastiaan works, for example. Through schema.org or structured data, you make sense of words, what words are, what words mean. And what we do with the people at Yoast, they did the schema.org implementation for that 11 million websites. Together with people at Yoast, we make the timestamp part of schema.org. That's a whole open source process as well. So I can, for the show notes, I can send over a link where people can track that information. We filed that issue in the GitHub of schema.org, the place where those discussions take place. And people from the Internet Consortium, the W3C, and people from the search engine world, they're all heavily interacting with this ID to make it part of schema as quickly as possible. And the second
That's
thing,
huge. Yeah, that's huge.
that's huge, and it's all in an open source way. And other parties as well, they can say, "Oh, we provide timestamp tooling as well." It's not just a WordProof game; it's really an open source way and ecosystem to make trust and therefore transparency and accountability part of the internet's DNA. So, and together with Yoast, we can push it really hard. They have a mailing list of 800,000 people. We firstly will roll out to with their publishers, then the e-commerce people. It's a way to roll out fast. And if we have the Shopify app and the WordPress thing in place, that's 43% of the web in total. Before the end of sorry, Leslie, before the end of the year, we have the two biggest publishers in the Netherlands. It's Mediahuis and DPG Media. Forget about those names, but they timestamp on two of their biggest titles. That's over 1 million quality articles that have been timestamped. And with that, we go to the search engines, not only Google, but also the DuckDuckGo and the smaller ones, and say, hey, look at this. We provide you a way that's really a solution to problems you currently encounter in search engines. It's an open source solution. We've made millions of articles using it. So now it's your turn. Who wants to be first in acknowledging those open source technologies?
I think it's we touched on Shopify for a second. I think it's sort of obviously besides WordPress, it's I think for e-commerce it is sort of the WordPress of e-commerce, where it's like most brands are using Shopify to power their direct to consumer brands or their marketplaces, whatever it may be, and it's such an important platform that exists out there. And how do we bring that trust to e-commerce? Because there is a massive industry of sort of fake apparel, right? And sort of fake this and fake that. And then also the great example, you gave to me the other day was sort of the terms of service and the warranty aspect of things, and how that changes, and how people don't kind of realize these things. And I think it's such a brilliant way to take a look at it. So let's look at e-commerce in this area and aspect, and how can it improve that entire ecosystem and sector.
Yeah, for sure. So we are recording on Black Friday, and every year on Black Friday there's a discussion. Hey, this discounts, is it honest, or is it just looking? Are we just pretending it to be a discount? What you want is seeing, hey, 2 weeks ago on this website, what was the price by then? There is a tool. There's archive.org, and with archive.org, you can scroll through all the revisions of some content on the internet. It's a cool thing, but it's a philanthropic project. It's super, super cool. I have them all the credits. I have to got them all the credits for that cool idea. With timestamps, you can do that yourself as a web shop owner. You can prove that you didn't tamper with your information, that you didn't tamper with your pricing, that you didn't tamper with your terms and conditions. What it does, it's a commitment to integrity by design as instead of integrity being an afterthought, instead of letting the consumer think, hey, was this okay, I have to trust them, it should be okay. With you can make your trustworthiness verifiable. For terms and conditions, so that's one of the use cases for the content, product information, showing proving your honesty. With terms and conditions, you can say, hey, I buy something, then it breaks in the warranty time, but in the meantime, the terms and conditions changed. 5 to 7% of all transactions in e-commerce end up being in some sort of dispute, and in many cases it's about the flow of information around it. If I go back to the merchant, but the merchant changed its terms and conditions, and in the new case they don't have to help me anymore, I'm totally reliant on the willingness of the merchant if I get help. With timestamps in place and sending over a copy which you can prove that was what was the deal at the moment of buying, you as a buyer have all the tools. It levels the playing field between buyer and seller, as it levels the playing field between the publisher and the reader, or the government and the citizen. It levels the playing field, and it makes that the merchant must act with integrity to the consumer, but the other way around as well. There's a lot of consumers, they try to mess up with their information to get a refund, which they shouldn't get.
Yeah.
So it protects all who handles with integrity in an open source way.
It can save companies money because consumers will have less fraud because they can verify things, and then it helps consumers because it helps them understand the warranty for the product they bought, right? Or the ability to understand maybe even what their like interest rates are or something like that. I'm just kind of going out of left field here, but like there's obviously tons of issues around, adjusted rate mortgages or adjusted interest rates, and a lot of different areas of buying things, right? Expensive things or credit, even in the financial structure. Understanding the fine print, right, can be such just a horror. It's just, you're right. I mean, none of us want to do it. We'd rather just get eaten by ants or something like that than to read these terms and conditions, which historically has been a way to manipulate the product, that they're not manipulate it, but say, hey, we're going to have this commercial that features all these fancy videos and pictures and cars and women and whatever it may be. But then at the very bottom of the screen, it has all this super, super fine print, right? And that, I think, hopefully something like this can sort of give a person an idea of what that stuff is when they buy stuff, and see exactly what they're buying from a signature standpoint. What is the contract you're signing when you're buying something? I think is really, really interesting, and trust in that, verification in that is, to me, a game changer.
And the whole chain, it's the news information, it's the e-commerce information, but it's also, if it can make the dollar of the advertiser more effective, it can make, in the end, products cheaper. If the content creators show their integrity, prove their trustworthiness by taking accountability and showing transparency, as a result, the search engines will rank it higher. Those with integrity will win. Those who take accountability will win. And that's really the game, to make integrity a precondition instead of an afterthought.
It's trying, I think, to reward responsibility and transparency and efficacy and just doing what you're saying you're doing, right? Not manipulating anything. I think unfortunately, the product shouldn't need to even exist at all, right? It's kind of the odd thing, right? It's kind of what we hope, but it's kind of just getting back to the basics, really. And I think using tools and using technology and open source to create a mechanism where we can kind of get back to the basics and say, hey, what I'm reading trusted? Right? Can I trust what I am reading? Can I trust what I am buying? I think it's such a basic foundation, right?
But at the same time, in society, it took us centuries to get the norms and values in place. It didn't happen overnight. So the internet currently is a mess, but nobody is to blame for that. It happened over time. We just didn't have the norms and the values in place. So I'm actually very optimistic on the internet. Finally, we have the tools there. For years, for almost a decade, we talk on all the problems on the internet. But the fact that there are open source building blocks based on which we can make, bring integrity, insert integrity in the DNA of the internet, make trust a precondition. Europe, for example, they are embracing this at rapid speed. That's what we see everywhere. The publishers, they want to do it. The small content publishers want to do it. It's there's a whole movement going on. It's people are embracing concepts like this. We're not too late. So that's the good thing there.
I always hesitate when we talk about like regulation and with GDPR and how things are necessary. I think, sometimes regulation is necessary, but I am very, very much against people putting regulations on things they don't understand. I think bad regulation has been quite an epidemic for a very long time.
Absolutely.
So with GDPR, when they sort of decided to do that, did they consult with, for instance, people like you, right? Or like people in the technology space? Because it always concerns me when regulations are put on by government entities that have no idea what they're doing. And you can see it, I think, with sort of these big tech CEOs going to Congress and seeing the questions and seeing their responses. They don't actually understand technology, right? So how are you going to regulate an industry that you don't understand how they make money, right? Or how they even work, right? That's a problem, right? And so if you're saying, I guess I say that to say, like they did with GDPR, and like you said, it was kind of it was badly executed. I think comes from the right heart. Yeah. Do you see a position in the future where you say this is a part of actually GDPR and regulation, where sites have to come on the blockchain, have a timestamp, right? Is that the next evolution of GDPR in a way? I don't know. I know I'm taking a long-term vision here approach.
No, but the thing is, the problem with GDPR was that it was top down. You have to do it before this date, otherwise you're at risk. What you can do with timestamps, what we do with timestamps is really a bottom-up approach. That's why I really love that we work with regulators, but we work especially with publishers. We work with the long tail in Yoast users, the millions of them, to do it from the bottom up. So start timestamping. We educate the search engines. It's so obvious as it solves big problems in search, like duplicated content. Who published something first? That's the thing search engines want to fix. With the timestamps in place from the timestampers themselves. Search engines have the tools in an open way. No trust in, for example, WordProof is necessary. With together the search engine and the content maker, they can settle it in a way. They can, in the case that there's duplicated content, they can see who was first and reward the right one instead of the bigger one who was indexed better in the search engine. So it's really a bottom-up approach. Then the policymakers, what will be the first thing? I can imagine that they say in a few years from now, all terms and conditions must be time-stamped because it really strengthens the consumer position. And that's what all governments want. They want consumers to have a strong position. And it differs per country, but in some countries, it's already mandatory to bring your terms and conditions to the Chamber of Commerce. But it's not everywhere. But yeah, I can imagine that regulation will start with something like that. The terms and conditions must be timestamped so that you can prove what the terms were at what moment in time. That's a logical start.
Usually I like to end these conversations with a little bit about the future. And I think we touched on it a little bit there, but from your perspective and from maybe WordProof's perspective, in 5 to 10 years, where do you see this going, right? Am I gonna just for just to be open and transparent here, I use Yoast for cause artists, right? I think it's a great plugin. I tell everybody, spend the money to buy it and learn how to use it. It just does wonders, right, for your site and for the production of it and the quality. Do you see, update on Yoast when now they have a new tab that has timestamp, like they have the schema tab, like they have social, like they have the SEO tab, right, and the meta tags. Do you foresee that happening? And just overall in the industry, what do you see for the next 5 to 10 years from this perspective?
Yeah, from the thing with Yoast, we're actively discussing that to do that one by one. Firstly for the publisher, then for the e-commerce, and then for all users. But to zoom out, how I see it is in 5 years from now, the tendency in the world would be, if you don't timestamp the information that matters, what are you hiding? You'd be considered a revisionist, fraud. Why didn't you timestamp? What are you hiding? That's where we're going with all of us. Now that there's a technology to do that in an open source way, yeah, what are you hiding? So that's how I see the world in a few years from now. So through timestamps, trust becomes part of the internet's DNA. With tools like Yoast, everyone who uses WordProof or WordPress can install it, and Shopify as well by the end of the year. You can install it literally in 5 minutes. Like with Yoast, there's a free edition with a few timestamps per month, and you can upgrade for if you have more, but it's really affordable. As we think that the ability to prove your integrity, it's a human right, and it shouldn't be a luxury thing. What we see is over the coming, every time Yoast talks about it, we talk about it, and there will be emails soon with Yoast Christmas actions, which educate a lot of people. There will be a lot of education on timestamping. So there's WordProof/Academy, where all use cases are explained. In a few years from now, search engines will reward it. Once they do it, it really matters to be early, as it's backward compatible. So if you timestamp today, and the search engine says in half a year, if they will even say, hey, we take it in account, it matters that you were early, as you can't place them in the, you can't place timestamps in history. That's the power of a timestamp. That is really about the now. So but that's where we see the world going. All information that matters, and it could be creative, it could be news, it could be commerce, it could be opinion. All content that matters will be timestamped, and because if you don't, consumers will be suspicious. Advertisers won't advertise with your brand, and big tech will rank you lower. That's where we see it going. But integrity as a precondition, that's the big idea.
I think before we end here, I want to go back on one thing that we didn't get a chance to touch on, but I think it's a super, super important issue. And that would be sort of copyright, whether you're a musician, right? Or I think it's interesting when people go viral, there's no way to sort of see who created it, right? All these sort of dances and all these like viral things, these creators don't get a chance to sort of monetize their creation because it's just off in the ether, right? Like who created this dance, or who created this or that, right? And I think, how could it work in the world of, first, let's talk about musicians, artists, maybe even comedian joke tellers, right? There's a lot of sort of stealing jokes, things like. How can this work for musicians, artists, comedians, and then how can it work for other sort of situations around sort of copyright and virality and time stamping that you created this first?
Yeah, it's such a problem for creatives currently.
Yeah.
It's hard because you want to share your talent with the world,
sure,
but sharing comes with a risk.
Absolutely.
And the most people in the open source space, they don't care too much about copyright, as they say, no, it should flow freely. But of course, in a way, you need protection and you want to be credited. But being it's really hard to get your credit, or it's hard to get legal protection. For example, if you want to bring something to the notary, it's expensive. It costs time. You don't want to spend time on that as a creative, because you're a creative. You want to produce new content. So ideally, the most simple solution is, if you have information, if you have your script, your joke, your video, timestamp it. You can timestamp with a plugin and for public facing content, but there's also, and we made a tool also with a free plan, it's wordproof.com/files, where you can just timestamp your information with the timestamp without publishing it. With that tool, you can always say, hey, it's kind of bring it to the notary, as you can indisputably prove that you had that information at that moment in time. And nobody else could have, if you didn't have the input for the hash, you weren't able to timestamp it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that hash. So
So
And there's
this is
all
great
kind.
because lawyers are going to hate this, right? This because it sounds like it's an opportunity for people to copyright their creative without having to spend money on a lawyer, time with a lawyer, paperwork, all this other BS. It's almost a legal stamp of approval of I created this by simply adding this plugin or adding this code, whatever it may be, on how they use it for their creation. But it's a
Yeah.
great way to sort of, now down the line you might want some legal protections and you can go do that stuff, but that timestamp helps you sort of put that in the piggy bank, right? Like, this is my asset. This
You
timestamp
can
proves this.
indisputably prove that you had it first. And furthermore, you can, if you timestamp the multiple revisions of it, authorship, a brand is something you register, but authorship is something different. It's about how information evolves over time, and then suddenly there's authorship. With timestamping revisions, you build a lot of rights, and you can indisputably prove that you had that information. So with the files tool we have, also with the free plan, you can timestamp 10 files a month for free. It strengthens your position as a creative massively, as you can prove that you had that information. So always timestamp it before you send it to someone. And what you can do is sending with that information, hey, I timestamped this information, just so you know, which shows it's kind of scarce copycats up front.
Yeah, it kind of does what email has kind of done a little bit, is that you can delete emails, but they're kind of not really deleted, right? Like, there's the FBI will find, like, even if you delete them, they could potentially get found because they're probably on servers somewhere that could be sort of dug up.
And there's to wrap the copyright thing off, there's also, for public information, there's a small shop in Amsterdam and they make beautiful lamps. They're really craftsmanships, two brothers making wonderful products. And what happened all the time was, and they made great content to sell it, great pictures, great stories. They make really a passport for every product they make. But people copy their content and order copies of their products in low production cost country and sell that on eBay, for example. That happened all the time.
Yeah.
Then they sent an email to eBay and said, hey, take it down. It's a copy of this product. And they say, yeah, sorry, we can't do that. Everybody can say this. But now they timestamp their information where they can say, hey, in the My WordProof, there's a place where they can say, hey, this is the copy. This is my product that has been copied. Generate a legal letter. They generated the letter, and 4 times in a row, and sent it to eBay 4 times in a row in less than 1 hour. eBay took down the copycat. So what did that do for them? They weren't able to spend time and money on a lawyer. A lawyer is really expensive everywhere.
Sure.
But now with the cheapest plan, they were able to get that legal protection. And in a way, it democratized the legal protection for them. For them, being small again matters.
Yeah.
Really a powerful use case.
It is. No, I think we stumbled on, I think, one of the best use cases out there, especially with sort of Etsy's and being able to be an artisan or a craftsman, right? And it can work in that arena where it's just a craftsperson at home creating something interesting, but also it could actually work for large companies too, right? Especially you see counterfeit in designer handbags, right? Or designer shoes. There's tons of this sort of counterfeit marketplace for all this stuff. Right. So I think it's also a way where consumers know that they're buying the actual real thing. I get messages from my brother all the time asking me if this stuff is real. Like, he's big into sneakers and stuff like that. And I'm like, look, if you have to ask yourself, then it's probably fake, and I think if there is a way to do that, and I think there's a lot of these marketplaces now out there. Like StockX does a really good job of creating the sort of verified marketplace of actual authentic products. And I think that this is a way, I think, to democratize that verification, where you don't need to raise millions and millions of dollars to create a StockX platform that can verify its users, things like that. It's a really way where if you run a blog, right, if you create a song on YouTube, if you create a dance on Instagram that goes viral or something like that, it's a way for any individual to basically copyright their creation at a very, free level, right? At some, it's in some standards. I think that's a real game changer in a lot of ways.
And then maybe no, as a last thing, you have another shop that's the Amsterdam Vintage Watches. So they sell vintage Rolex, stuff like that. It's an e-commerce use case. They timestamp all their information now. And what they do is they open the watch to see what the quality is, and then they put a price on it, and then they sell it. But what if the watchmaker says, hey, I've opened a watchmaker with a good reputation, connects her or his reputation to the product timestamp after checking the watch? That makes the quality verifiable of it. And
theoretically, could Rolex or any company, right, actually start to create products with like some type of little something on the back or something where you could simply just scan it with your iPhone and it brings up the verification sort of thing, right? Or the timestamp of whatever that sort of instantly verifies things. To where I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could do this stuff, and it's interesting.
We can do a whole new episode on this because there's a technology in blockchain which is a non-fungible tokens, but let's keep that for a next one. But
okay, sounds good.
It's a great, it's on our website, the Amsterdam Vintage Watches use case, which really elaborates on putting accountability and reputation. You, as if you sell vintage stuff, so not the new stuff, how you can leverage timestamps to leverage your reputation online as well, as a small shop and a big shop.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sebastiaan, for taking the time. I know you're busy, and I know we're all kind of having a lot of different things going on in our life at the moment. So I'm always very grateful for people that take time out of their day to talk about interesting things, and things that
Thanks for having me.
Disrupt a lot of things in our world that need some disruption, right, in a good way. And I think tech has the power to do that on a lot of different levels, specifically blockchain as it matures itself, right? I think it still has a long way to go. So appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much, and can't wait to see what